tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Welcome back to the Andrew Lawton Show. I mentioned at the beginning of the program here that all of the science tables, the science advisory committees have tended to approach the pandemic with a one-track mind that looks at getting case counts down, even at the expense of economic welfare, mental health care, effect on children, child development, all of these other things, which are absolutely critical and I think by and large have gone ignored or certainly undervalued through the course of the pandemic. Kids being pulled out of school yet again in many provinces is a great reminder of this. Well, all of these science advisory committees have had this narrow focus, so there's now a private sector alternative, if I can call it that, a group that's assembled together to bring together experts, scientific experts, and public policy experts to achieve the lofty goal of exiting the pandemic. This is the Canada Science and Policy Committee to Exit the Pandemic, which launched yesterday, and the co-chair of this is Irvin Studin, who, again, I'd use the whole show if I wanted to give him a proper introduction. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He's done lots of work. He's a former soccer pro. He's, of course, helming the Institute for 21st Century Questions, but in this context, he's the co-chair of the Canada Science and Policy Committee to Exit the Pandemic. Irvin, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on today.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
One of the big things we've been so mired in for the last 2 years has been how we live through the pandemic. It was originally going to be, as you know, 2 weeks and then a couple of weeks longer, and now we're looking at basically the third calendar year of the COVID era. Why have the discussion now about what it means to exit this whole thing?
Well, we're not having a discussion and we're not searching for meaning. We're actually meaning to exit. So we've struck up a national committee, properly national, across all the provinces, all the regions, all the territories, to choreograph an exit from the pandemic for the entire country in the coming months. And I do mean in the coming months. What we've done with the new Canada Science and Policy Committee, which is based out of the Institute for 21st Century Questions, one of Canada's leading think tanks, is that we brought together the two intellectual solitudes of this pandemic, the scientific and medical community and the policy community. And operating in silos and in solitude, we've had disintegration on the ground. We bring them together. We need to map out a holistic exit across the systems of society, across our multiple crises, and practically. I mean, we mean business. We're not there as a science experiment. We're not there for narcissism or fun. We're there to exit because otherwise the country will not survive.
A lot of the science advisory committees that we have giving their guidance to provincial governments right now are digging deeper and deeper into lockdowns and into restrictions. What is it that your experts are seeing that they aren't?
Well, first of all, we make several shifts that I think are missing. First of all, we bring together again the scientists and the policy people. One of my fundamental diagnoses of our catastrophes, and we have multiple catastrophes in the country, is that the politicians are illiterate on science, but the science and medical community stinks at public policy. So we bring them together. We try to make up for each other's weaknesses and advance each other's areas of expertise. It is a policy lead. First of all, that's one of the major shifts of this national committee to exit. It is a policy lead, not a science lead. The science supports it. It is one of many inputs, but it is not a science project. It is not a research project. We are not following the science. The science informs the policy. We are not, as one Ontario official said, looking at the virus as in charge. We can't do anything. The virus is in charge. Nay, this is a policy lead. It is to exit. It is to choreograph an exit that has been already choreographed in many other advanced and less advanced countries, no less. The other shift is that we're doing real systems thinking across the systems. Andrew, you'll appreciate that in our country today, we don't have one single crisis. We actually have 6 or 7 crises of system nationally. We have the pandemic. We have public health writ large. The pandemic becomes the minor crisis before long. We have a massive education crisis. We have an economic crisis of historical proportions. We have a national unity crisis. We have an international crisis. We have an institutional crisis, and we have a growing social crisis, one of broken norms. We need to work across all these systems and exit in the coming months. Many countries in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Latin America are already exiting. This is a unique committee in that it's practical. We bring together really properly national experts across all the disciplines, representing all parts of the country. That's the other unique thing. It is really national. And we plan to exit because the country needs it desperately. And we will provide both the advice and the courage and the vocabulary and the frameworks to do so.
Is this plan one that only governments are in a position to accept or reject, or is there something here that businesses and individuals can take from as well as they move forward?
In the end, of course, it's a government exit because government is choreographing a lot of the moves. So it's a policy exit informed by science, but all these other areas: economics, social policy, psychology, education, of course. I should say the media plays a major role, and individual leaders in communities, civil society, and institutions play a major role in changing the psychology. We must not over sentimentalize the last 2 years and lick our wounds about where we are today. That's one of the big weaknesses in our national response. We must be purposeful and bold, and we must exit as a mature country. In fact, if you look back at some of the diagnoses, and I think this will be the case when we look back a number of years hence on where we've been weakest, we say that we not only overreacted, but we didn't properly gauge the nature and the measure of the crisis. And in world historical terms, this was not a major crisis. God forbid there should be one. And countries that have endured far larger crises acted with much more maturity because they said, you know what, this is a crisis. It's a pandemic. Here's the measure of the pandemic. And here's how we respond given all our other tragedies in the past. Fortunately for Canada, we haven't had major public catastrophes at this scale over the last 100 years, even almost since Confederation, if I may be so bold. So our reaction has been non-systematic, immature, overly sentimental, and we're here to be strictly practical, to exit. And we mean to exit because as proud Canadians, we realize that if we continue, the forward scenario is not status quo, it is continued disintegration, including the possible collapse of the country. So we need to reverse that energy, and we mean to do it in the coming few months.
So let's talk about a parallel universe here in which your committee is the one driving public policy in Canada or in one or all of the provinces here. What's the day one action that you'd take to implement this plan? What do you put in place right now, and what does the next few months look like?
Well, first of all, let's talk about when the exit actually happens, when we declare that this is over for all practical intents and purposes for Canada. I believe it has three parts. One is that COVID becomes largely endemic and seen thus. And I believe the Chief Medical Officer of Health of Canada, Theresa Tam, declared that we're trending towards that even yesterday. A number of countries are already there. A number of countries are extrapolating that. So the pandemic becomes endemic. It has seasonal intensity. But
you don't think Canada is there just yet, you're saying, correct?
We're very close.
Okay.
Second point is that the pandemic, even in the endemic form, becomes properly gauged. That is, we deal with people with comorbidities, aged people, the vulnerable, in a specific class of treatment and intervention of various intelligent forms, like we would have in 2019. We would treat them as vulnerable and we intervene maturely. But for the rest of the society, starting with the young and the able and everyone else, we work, build, and learn, and play for the young people. That's fundamental. And the final point on the exit is that on a proper systems view, we begin to understand the pandemic. If we imagine we have 6 or 7 or 8 balls in the air in a society as massive and complex as Canada, the pandemic is just a part of one ball. It is not the totality of our crisis, not the totality of our imagination. And we don't imagine that there's just one exit for all these crises, including that one little ball. So it's a systems apprehension that we will impose on the both decision makers and the societal understanding of the crisis. And that's a threefold exit, and we'll get there soon. In terms of the general choreography of the short term, we must restore the rhythm of our society. All those things that we knew in Canada to be part of the daily bread must be restored with great deliberation, consideration, choreography, starting with the children in school, without restriction, without inhibition, play, learn. It's one of the fundamental rhythms of the society. the rhythm of sport, of culture, of restaurant. All of that needs to be restored with, in my preliminary assessment, with great energy, not zombieing out of the condition as if we've been struck about the head 5 times. It's actually counterintuitive, but we need to punch back with high energy, not low energy. We need to come out with a statement, very much like at the end of a war. There would be a parade. Here, we're not talking about a parade. We're talking about restoring the rhythm of society, which is deeply ingrained in us. We've forgotten how to live elegantly in Canada. And the committee, I hope, will give both the choreography and the courage to say, back we go. We're a sophisticated, advanced, old society in political terms. We've been living inelegantly over the last 2 years. The inelegant living is not our default equilibrium. We're coming out, but we need a higher energy level to get out of there. We've stuck here, and we've created a storyline that is overly sentimental and self-congratulatory. This is our lifestyle. Aren't we suffering? No, we need to go higher, but that requires work, that requires more thinking, and that really requires an energy push to get us to that higher equilibrium that we enjoyed so much over the last 100 years.
Now, when you talk about restoring that rhythm of society, are you talking about lifting things like mask mandates and vaccine passports and basically returning to life, March 1st, 2020, or even November 1st, 2020, or 2019, I guess?
I think my own preliminary thinking and the early thinking of the committee is, of course, there will be deliberate actions that say, we're back, life is back to normal. We're not zombieing again out of this, where we say all of these legacy things that were there purposefully, sometimes competently, sometimes less competently, sometimes accidentally, to manage the pandemic, that these are legacy items with which we'll need to learn to live. No. This is a deliberate statement that we're exiting in the full sense. And might I add, Andrew, that because we've had so many crises, we're not exiting back to 2019 living. That rhythm of 2019 should be there, but it will require that much more work to get out of the multiple crises. So the pandemic, in my assessment, will be the minor crises of our 6 or 7 crises. And therefore, we require work across education. We have 200,000 children out of school permanently in Canada. We need to get them back to school. We have huge tens of thousands of businesses that have disintegrated. We have a social crisis whereby you have to negotiate the norms, restaurant to restaurant, community to community, household to household, complete breakdown, and province to province, no less. We have a national unity crisis. The civil services and political class of the country have not seen the country in 2 years. They don't know what's happening, except for on their Twitter feed or on Facebook, or what they might get on a text message or phone. All of that rhythm needs to be restored by statement, deliberately, not accidentally. And the political class right now is slightly in the realm of deer in the headlight, a little bit traumatized, confused, and we will give them that direction and courage to effectuate that choreography that we're seeing already in other countries.
I know it's early. You just launched this committee this week formally, but has there been any political leaders, have there been any political leaders provincially or federally that seem to be approaching this with an open mind?
We're in touch with a lot of them, if not all of them, on both the political and scientific sides, and of course on the policy side. And we're strictly non-ideological, non-partisan, always practical, very much in the tradition of the Institute for 21st Century Questions. The mandate of the committee is strictly practical. We will give advice, we will speak to everyone, and we will, I expect, to give courage to the country to declare an exit in the coming months. That is the plan. That is my expectation.
Well, that is my hope as well. Joining me is, of course, the chair of the Worldwide Commission to Educate All Kids, the president of the Institute for 21st Century Questions, and the co-chair of the Canada Science and Policy Committee to Exit the Pandemic. And I didn't mention him earlier, but the other co-chair is Dr. Kwadwo Kyerematen, who's been phenomenal on this as well. So glad to see he's involved. Thank you very much, Irvin, for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Irvin Studin, thanks again for your time. Listen, he's got some great names on there. Dr. Martha Fulford, who's been a solid advocate, especially on the school reopening aspect, as has Dr. Kwadwo Kiramatang, who has the Quadcast, which is something you should definitely listen to. Again, he's been a doctor that's pushed back against a lot of those who just want lockdowns indefinitely. So I was very glad to see his name there. And also public policy people, former politicians, current politicians, people that have an eye for public policy where a lot of the medical advisors and science advisors have not. One of the biggest problems I talked about earlier on in the pandemic was that people with a one-track focus on one particular outcome, who are unconcerned with economic outcome, unconcerned with child development and child welfare, and all of these other things, were directing policy based on one particular metric, which was an important one, but not something that you can take at the expense of all of these other things. So I would say we could probably expedite that exit from the pandemic sooner. Like I said a couple of weeks ago, the pandemic is over when people say it is. But I'm glad to see some intellectual and academic gravitas coming towards that perspective, that politicians have to just put their line in the sand and say, you know what, we're leaving this thing. We've got to end things there. My thanks to all of you for tuning in to The Andrew Lawton Show today. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show.